Ending in the first decades of this century, the settlement of the Great Plains has not yet taken on the quality of legend or lore to Plains people. It is still as close to them as the prairie is to the sky. This was America's last settlement experience. The last generation of American settler lives out his days here. He has not forgotten the hardships, the drought, the blizzard, and the flood, marking off the years of success and defeat. And always there was the uncertainty, the wondering of what the next year would bring. The vicious boom-bust cycle played hell with the Plains farmer. Two powerful forces worked against him. He could not combat the natural forces or the devastation of economic exploitation. He was the first to fall in the wake of depression and financial panic. The pioneer dug down deep, summoning great stores of personal courage as he battled the elements and economics of the region, only to discover that his individual efforts, no matter how valiant and determined, were often stripped away by the wind or the stroke of a banker's pen. The Plains farmer first looked to his neighbor as he sought to form organizations which would give him strength. Working together was the right thing to do in Plains country, where the uncertain existence bred reliance upon one another. The spirit of cooperation ran deep here, and from this natural and neighborly practice, the Plains farmer found the beginnings of organizational strength. A coming together of the resources and energies of many men accomplished what no one man could do alone. Cooperative institutions have flourished upon the Plains and are uniquely suited to meet the special economic and social needs of the region. Cooperatives continue to play a vital role in the development of the Great Plains. Of all the cooperative enterprises undertaken by the Plains farmer, none has changed his life so dramatically as the bringing of electricity to his farm and home. Less than 11% of the farms had Central Station electric service in 1935, and farmers were quick to seize the opportunity that came with the Rural Electrification Act of 1936, providing low-cost, long-term government loans to bring electricity to the sparsely settled regions. The farmers chose to organize in the familiar cooperative manner to meet their needs for electric power. The Rural Electric Cooperative was organized in the one-man, one-vote principle, and every farmer had a voice in its operations. Directors were elected at open membership meetings to create and guide the policy of the cooperative. There was consumer control. The night the lights came on for the first time in the farm home was an event never to be forgotten. Rural electrification had delivered the farm family from darkness and changed the fabric of rural society forever. But it meant something more than convenience and creature comfort. The farmer, in cooperation with his neighbors, had made this wondrous electricity possible. He had had a hand in it. Some distribution cooperatives built lines and bought power from private utilities, but comprehensive area coverage did not come until federal hydroelectric dams were built on the Missouri River under the Pick-Sloan Plan. The multipurpose dams were to be built on the ill-tempered Missouri to control devastating floods and to provide for irrigation, recreation, and navigation. Hydroelectric power produced would pay for the cost of the dams. Construction of the dams was the first giant step toward total development of the region. But above all else, the dams symbolized hope. The first in the chain of multipurpose main stem dams had begun with construction of Fort Peck Dam in Montana in 1936 by the U.S. Corps of Engineers. After authorization by the Flood Control Act of 1944, others followed. Garrison in North Dakota, Oahe, Big Bend, Fort Randall, and Gavin's Point in South Dakota. The latest hydroelectric addition in the region was Yellowtail Dam. Built in the late 1960s by the Bureau of Reclamation, it is located on the Bighorn River in eastern Montana. The Flood Control Act made it clear that cooperatives would have first call on power produced by the dams. They would be preference customers. The U.S. Bureau of Reclamation would market the hydroelectric energy. The Bureau of Reclamation was at work building a high-voltage regional transmission grid, but it remained the task of cooperative leaders to find a way for this power to reach the individual cooperatives. Distribution cooperatives met the challenge by forming generation and transmission cooperatives, G&Ts. The G&Ts were given responsibility for supply and delivery of high-voltage federal hydroelectric energy to the distribution substations, and they got the job done. Low-cost power from the dams had been brought to the most remote areas of the Great Plains, where today there are still less than 2 rural consumers per mile of line. The objective of area coverage, electric service for all rural people, had met its greatest test and had been achieved. The G&Ts had been created out of necessity to fill a special need. Their role, along with the distribution cooperatives, has become increasingly important to the development of the plains. It is a continuing job. Today, the G&Ts and their members are involving themselves in new dimensions of area responsibility beyond the supply and delivery of power. They are working to encourage economic growth and develop the human and natural resources of the region in a range of community improvement and area development programs. In their service areas, the G&Ts work in cooperation with their member systems, plus many other groups, both public and private, seeking to improve the quality of rural life, to continue the efforts of earlier men and movements, to make the region more economically self-sufficient and self-reliant. It is through this involvement, through this recognition, that the job is not yet done, that the story of rural electrification upon the plains remains vital and continuing. The regional development concept symbolized by the coming of the dams was taking hold in areas outside of government. One dramatic example was the way in which rural electric cooperatives responded to the challenge of future power supply. In the late 1950s, the Secretary of Interior told the preference customers that their growing loads would outstrip the capacity of the federal dams by the early 1960s. Here, the preference customers faced an enormous challenge. Leland Olds, former Federal Power Commission chairman and champion of consumer-owned power, in late 1959 laid before the preference customers a bold and far-reaching plan, calling for large consumer-owned steam-generating plants integrated with the federal hydroelectric system, a hydrothermal mix, he called it, and his studies pointed to the vast lignite fields of North Dakota. The cheap fuel, coupled with the economies of large-scale generation, could provide continuing low-cost power for the rural consumers. Olds stated, the secret lies in establishing a single regional wholesale power supply system that can build and integrate the plants as a source of bulk power supply for all systems in the region. Only through separating the power supply function from the distribution function can the business of electric service be put on a sound, modern basis. Leland Olds had shown the small consumer-owned systems how they could control their destinies. It now remained for them to execute the plan. Events were to move swiftly after 1959. After many months of study and planning, 7 generation and transmission cooperatives, representing 67 distribution cooperatives from 8 states, joined together and formed Basin Electric Power Cooperative. Formally incorporated on May 5, 1961, it was best described at the time as a regional generation and transmission cooperative responsible for achieving the goal of large-scale thermal generation. Basin Electric President Arthur Jones recalls that day.
We organized in 1961 on the basis of open membership so that all cooperatives in the region who wished to join could share in the benefits of low-cost power. By joining together in this way and building large-scale generation, we could realize this low cost, and all co-op members would benefit. Every co-op would pay the same rate, a postage stamp rate, for delivered power. We would strive to keep the cost of power as low as possible. An important policy in setting this goal was the maximum use of existing power facilities in the region. A major accomplishment toward this end came with the signing of the contract with the Bureau of Reclamation the following year. To achieve further economies, we adopted the principle of coordinated planning and pooling. We would begin to actively pursue this goal with the formation of our own consumer-owned power pool in early 1963. We adopted a policy of natural resource conservation. Later, when we'd sign a fuel contract for lignite, there would be provisions in it for restoring spoil banks to a rolling countryside. These policies, adopted in the spring of 1961, were mandates which the Basin Electric Board of Directors were committed to as elected representatives of the member cooperatives in the region. These are the bedrock policies of Basin Electric. There have been times when these policies have been severely tested, but they have endured. We continue to be committed to them, no matter how difficult the going gets.
In forming the Bulk Power Supply Cooperative, rural electric leaders in the basin had again demonstrated their organizational abilities, their capacity to grasp a difficult concept, grapple with it, and bring forth a set of principles, a framework, which would guide them in the great task of meeting their power needs, this time over a vast region. These were the years of feverish activity. In late 1961, Basin Electric, along with other consumer-owned systems in the region, joined together in drawing up a landmark pooling agreement with the U.S. Department of Interior. The pooling agreement provided for the formation of a regional power planning and pooling organization to be called the Missouri Basin Systems Group, MBSG. Through MBSG, future planning would be coordinated. The pooling agreement further provided for establishment of a joint transmission system with the Bureau of Reclamation Network serving as the backbone. All members of the systems group transmitting power over the Bureau of Reclamation grid would share in its annual cost. A major benefit of the agreement was the opening of opportunities for economical interchange of energy. Studies indicated building the largest lignite-fueled plant feasible, and on May 3rd, 1962, less than a year after formation of the cooperative, the Rural Electrification Administration granted Basin Electric a $36.6 million loan for construction of a 212,000 kilowatt thermoelectric generating plant on the lignite fields near Stanton, North Dakota, contingent upon delivery arrangements with the Bureau of Reclamation over the joint transmission system. The nucleus of a management staff was formed, and major construction contracts were awarded. Later that year, an historic contract between the Department of Interior and Basin Electric for leasing excess capacity in the Bureau of Reclamation's transmission system was signed, assuring delivery of the low-cost thermal power. The contract also provided for sale of surplus Basin Electric energy to the Bureau of Reclamation. Construction of the generating station began in mid-1963. Targeted for completion in late 1965, the dream of consumer-owned regional power set in motion by a scholarly paper delivered by Leland Olds in 1959 was rapidly becoming a reality. The massive power plant rising out of the North Dakota prairie was the largest lignite-burning facility ever to be built in the Western Hemisphere when it went into commercial operation in early January of 1966. Officially dedicated on September 24th of that year, it was fittingly named in honor of Leland Olds, lifelong public servant, teacher, architect of ideas, mover of men's minds. The highly successful operation of Unit 1 since 1966 has proven conclusively that the principle of consumer control, if pursued diligently, can be effectively applied to a difficult and complex industry over a vast region in a time when many feel that the individual is becoming increasingly remote from the decision-making process of his own institutions. A number of safeguards have been established to preserve and protect this principle of consumer control. Major policy decisions are made by Basin Electric's 11-man board of directors. The directors, who stand for election each year, make the long-range decisions regarding regional bulk power supply for the rural consumer, the man at the end of the line. They also serve on subcommittees which deal with specific functions of the cooperative. In addition to board control, delegates representing each member electric system in the districts vote on critical issues at Basin Electric annual membership meetings. The delegates may vote to amend the bylaws and articles of incorporation of their cooperative or vote to amend the co-op's borrowing authority. Policy resolutions which establish guidelines for management of the cooperative are developed by a committee of delegates, one from each membership district. These resolutions are acted upon by the full assembly of delegates at their annual meeting. These safeguards of cooperative democracy at work through elected representatives are the means through which the individual consumer exercises his franchise and continues to guide the direction of his regional power supply cooperative. The Missouri Basin consumer-owned systems, through joint regional planning, have met with success because many people have come together, committing their experience, talents, and energies. One such group of men is the Management Advisory Committee, composed of Basin Electric Class A member managers. The Advisory Committee meets regularly to exchange and coordinate information and contribute their management knowledge and skills to the decision-making process in such important areas as power rates, power supply planning, financing, long-range forecasting, and the overall operation of the regional power supply plan. Intensive planning for future power supply in the Missouri Basin had begun in the early 1960s with the signing of the pooling agreement, the creation of the Joint Transmission System, and the formation of the Missouri Basin Systems Group, MBSG. The first job undertaken by MBSG through its planning committee was a comprehensive engineering study of the region. This was Study 134. It determined the future power supply needs of MBSG members after the loading of Basin Electric's Unit 1. In the years since Study 134, the responsibilities of the MBSG Planning Committee have continued to grow, with the group meeting regularly throughout the year to coordinate regional power supply planning and study. Completed in 1964, Study 134 concluded that the lignite resources of the Upper Missouri River Basin continue to offer the lowest cost fuel available and pointed to the building of additional generation by Basin Electric. Study 134 indicated that even with the cost of building necessary additions to the joint transmission system, the economies of large-scale lignite generation gave this plan the greatest cost advantage. Another study, Study 154, reviewed an updated 10-year load forecast to determine the amount of additional generation needed to meet MBSG loads throughout the 1970s. Tracing the steps involved in studies such as 154 will show us how the three different kinds of cooperatives, the distribution co-op, the G&T, and the power supply cooperative, work together in coordinated long-range regional power planning. The entire process revolves around the 10-year load forecast, and the individual distribution cooperative is the first very important step. The distribution co-op analyzes the future load growth of its members and makes projections based upon its past growth experience, national growth trends, and estimates of potential new loads in its service area. The 10-year forecast from the distribution co-op is then turned over to the G&T cooperative, of which it is a member. The G&T conducts engineering studies to determine what quantities of power will be needed over the 10-year period by its combined membership and how that power can be delivered most economically. It is here at the G&T level that coordinated joint planning begins evolving into the one system approach. The 10-year forecasts and studies by the G&Ts and the distribution cooperatives enables the bulk power supply cooperative, in this case Basin Electric, to make the regional power studies necessary to plan for additional generation. It determines what backbone transmission facilities are required to deliver power at points planned earlier by the G&Ts. It was this kind of comprehensive approach, coordinated with other power systems through MBSG, that characterized planning for Basin Electric's second unit and makes possible a workable regional power supply program for Missouri Basin consumer-owned systems in the 1970s, a program pointed to in the electrical industry as a model of regional power planning. Study 154 concluded that a 400,000 kilowatt addition to Basin Electric's first unit, integrated with hydroelectric peaking power from the Missouri River dams after 1977, would meet the power requirements of MBSG members through 1979. These studies included estimates of transmission facilities required to deliver power from the second Basin Electric unit and played an important part in the sound planning presentation, enabling Basin Electric to receive its $97 million second unit loan from REA in 1968. Study 207 by Basin Electric and the Bureau of Reclamation was begun in 1969 to specifically determine transmission facilities needed to deliver second unit power and to upgrade the transmission system to higher reliability standards. Coordinated through MBSG and completed in 1971, the comprehensive study involved 266 computer case runs of possible transmission additions to the regional grid on a one-system basis. Basin Electric and the Bureau of Reclamation then signed an agreement outlining their responsibilities to upgrade the joint transmission system. Building of additional Basin Electric generation and transmission facilities is but one of three major elements of the MBSG 10-year coordinated plan. The three major elements are: 1, the nuclear-powered 800,000 kilowatt Cooper Station at Brownville, Nebraska, plus 345 kilovolt extra high voltage transmission built by Nebraska Public Power District. 2, construction of 345 kilovolt transmission lines by the Bureau from Fort Thompson, South Dakota to Grand Island, Nebraska, and from Watertown, South Dakota to Sioux City, Iowa, to make deliveries of Bureau power to its customers and meet reliability standards. And 3, the 460,000 kilowatt lignite-fueled Basin Electric Unit 2 as an addition to its 212,000 kilowatt first unit, plus 2 345 extra high voltage transmission lines and other transmission facilities to deliver the output of the second unit as determined by Study 207. A major benefit will be maximum use of hydroelectric peaking capacity available from the Bureau of Reclamation, using the same capacity to provide peaking power for the Nebraska Public Power District in the summer and Basin Electric in the winter. Basin Electric in 1972 began constructing the two 345 kilovolt lines totaling 526 miles from Stanton, North Dakota to Bureau of Reclamation substations at Fort Thompson and Watertown, South Dakota, as well as additional 230 and 115 kilovolt lines and substations. Second unit construction began in July of 1971, with completion scheduled for the summer of 1975. The giant 400 megawatt generating plant will meet Basin Electric Class A member loads through 1978. Upon completion of the Basin Electric 345 lines, Basin Electric's first and second units will be solidly connected through the regional grid to Cooper Station and to the power systems of the East and South. The Bureau has completed construction of the Fort Thompson to Grand Island, Nebraska portion of the north-south backbone line and is proceeding on the Watertown-Sioux City 345 kilovolt line. The Nebraska Public Power District has completed its portion of the 345 kilovolt grid from Grand Island to the 800,000 kilowatt nuclear Cooper Station at Brownville on the Missouri River south of Omaha. The atomic-powered Cooper Station is scheduled for completion in 1973, and the Iowa Power and Light Company, which will purchase half of the generating station's output, has built 345 kilovolt transmission to Des Moines, interconnecting with grids to the east. The extra high voltage transmission lines in the MBSG plan will greatly strengthen the Missouri Basin transmission system to which all power suppliers are connected. The plan will increase reliability and guard against blackouts such as those which occurred in the late 1960s. The plan will also result in much stronger connections with the power systems to the east and to the west. Cooperation with neighboring power pools will increase the reliability of all transmission systems and avoid needless duplication. As with Unit 1, the key to this comprehensive 10-year regional power plan is joint planning in the old tradition on the one-system basis, with the benefit of hydrothermal integration. By blending the two kinds of generation together, the thermal plants will firm up an additional 280,000 kilowatts of hydro peaking capacity. Joint planning such as this helps keep power rates in the region down. The 10-year plan results in an assured supply of over 1 million kilowatts of low-cost thermal power for Basin Electric members in the late 1970s. Now entering its second decade of regional power planning, the elements of the Systems Group's first 10-year plan are coming together and can be seen building upon the plains. This long-range regional approach to future power supply has been successful because rural electric cooperatives and other small consumer-owned systems, in partnership with their government, have worked together to control their destinies, to deal out of strength. In 10 years, the Systems Group members have developed basic concepts, formed a framework, and created a strong, workable, full-fledged operating system. They did it. They made it work. And today they have the means and the momentum through the Missouri Basin Systems Group to plan and to build with confidence for the abundant supplies of low-cost power they will need for the 1980s and beyond, an assurance not felt in most regions of the United States. We realize we have asked you to digest a large amount of technical information in a short time. We've done so because power supply planning is a highly technical and complicated subject in this day and age. However, we feel that our film would not be complete without a brief look at the operation of the joint regional system, some insight into the environmental aspects of power supply, and a glance at the next phase of power supply planning. You have seen the various elements which make up the power supply program for the Missouri Basin consumer-owned systems. How all these elements are brought together to make the hydrothermal pool operate as one system will be of interest to you. To understand it, it is necessary to see how the Corps of Engineers, responsible for the operation of the main stem hydroelectric dams, and the Bureau of Reclamation, which is responsible for marketing and delivering the power, work together daily to coordinate the hydrothermal pool. First, we go to the Bureau's Power Systems Office at Watertown, South Dakota, the coordination center where the Joint Transmission System is operated. Jerry Juba, the Power Systems Officer, explains the operation.
This is the System Dispatching Office of the Bureau of Reclamation in Watertown, South Dakota. We have responsibility for operating the Joint Transmission System associated with the pooling agreement of the Missouri Basin Systems Group. Our job basically involves the minute-by-minute matching of generation and load in the Missouri Basin area. We have control of the power plants, the 6 power plants of the Corps of Engineers on the main stem of the Missouri, the Bureau's Canyon Ferry Power Plant, and the Yellowtail Power Plant. The Leland Olds plant of Basin Electric is also under our operational jurisdiction. Dynamically displayed on this board are the power flows that are leaving this control area. For example, this meter shows the power flow at this moment going out the tie to Columbus, Nebraska, of Nebraska Public Power District. We totalize all of the meters that we see on the board, compare it to the schedule for the moment, and with our load control equipment, we then generate pulses to the power plant to raise or lower generation depending on whether we have an area requirement. When we're on 0, we have generation and load matched. At the present time, the Oahe Power Plant is the power plant that is on control, is bearing generation. We have the ability to control with Basin Electric's unit, Garrison, Big Bend, and Fort Randall, in addition to Oahe.
At the Missouri River Division Headquarters of the Corps of Engineers at Omaha, Nebraska, personnel at the Reservoir Control Center are in contact with the Bureau's Watertown office, giving allocations of hydroelectric power from their main stem dams 24 hours in advance. At a regular morning briefing at the Omaha Control Center, Nels Carlson reviews the previous day's power production.
Yesterday's power generation totaled 39 million 800,000 kilowatt hours. This is a substantial increase from the day before when we had a little less than 34 million kilowatt hours. This came about by sale of some maintenance and replacement power because of about 5 million kilowatt hours, and then the other million was due to the warmer weather that has occurred the last few days. Today's schedule calls for 37.5 million kilowatt hours, but we're running a little ahead of that so far this morning. We're more likely to be up around 39 million. And talking to Watertown a moment ago, they tell us now that our load estimate for tomorrow will also be about 39 million kilowatt hours. Nebraska yesterday took some substantial deliveries from the system, totaling about 600 megawatts out of a total of entitlement of 712 megawatts when they get their heaviest load. For yesterday and the past few days, we've been holding our releases at 10,000 CFS from Fort Peck, Garrison at 25,000 CFS. Oahe and Big Bend yesterday were about 40,000. Today we'll probably have about the same amount out of that project. And Fort Randall releases have been increased back up to full power plant output of a little over 45,000 CFS. You notice our Gavin's Point pool shows a little less than yesterday, 1207.3. However, by 8 o'clock this morning, it was up to 1207.5 again. So we think that pool level is probably going to end up today about 1207.6.
A typical day in the operation of the Regional Integrated Hydrothermal Pool. Because the operation works so well, it seems pretty commonplace and routine. Yet when first proposed not so long ago, the integrated idea was thought by many to be unworkable, as too difficult a concept to be advanced in the Missouri Basin. But today, real planning and pooling is working in the region because pioneering ideas were not allowed to die, but were made into practical working concepts. Far-sighted, pioneering ideas have been at the forefront of long-range power planning by the Missouri Basin consumer-owned systems. This has been true not only of the way they have developed planning and operations techniques, but in their early adoption of resource conservation policies and practices. More than 10 years ago, long before the words environment and ecology became familiar to utility boardrooms, the directors of Basin Electric wrote into the cooperative's fuel contract requirements for rehabilitation of spoil banks by lignite mining. Basin Electric was the first utility in the United States to write this kind of a contract. It was required because the cooperative's membership is made up of people who are close to their land, who respect it and do not want to see it irreparably lost as it has been in other regions of the United States. Beginning with the 1963 session of the North Dakota State Legislature, Basin Electric has regularly advocated legislation to protect the state's precious air and water resources against pollution, and has repeatedly supported strong legal requirements for the reclamation of spoil banks. Environmental considerations had a high priority when Basin Electric selected the routes for its two 345 kilovolt transmission lines in the early 1970s. Research was done to develop effective electrostatic precipitators to capture fly ash emissions. These are being installed in units 1 and 2. The effects of water returned from the plant's cooling system to the Missouri River is under continuing study. The MVSG concept of pooling requirements and joint system planning by many utilities on the one system basis is in itself an approach toward more efficient use of resources, reducing the number of individual plants and transmission lines, thus lessening the impact upon the environment. Environmental laws and regulations are today a major consideration in the planning and building of power facilities and may add many months to the lead time required to get major generating stations on the line. What we have seen as we have moved through nearly 40 years of accomplishment in bringing power to the plains is the enactment of one of the greatest cooperative experiences in modern times. It is a story of true achievement, one in which many can take pride. It is so because the people who made this program work recognized that the job was not done, that there were needs to be met and fulfilled. It is not any less true today as cooperatives in the region again move together in response to their members' needs to provide adequate supplies of power for the 1980s. In an undertaking known as the Joint System Power Project, the JSPP. Let's quickly review the plans for this new venture with Robert Maritz, Executive Director of the Missouri Basin Systems Group.
For decades, progressive rural electric and public power leaders of the Missouri River Basin have been advancing the concept of regionalism, of joint planning and action, so that the small electric systems, cooperatives, municipals, and public power districts could be brought together in a shared one-system power supply program. They viewed regionalism as survival for the small systems of the vast plains area. Today, we are actively implementing the concepts and plans advanced by these regional leaders in the Missouri Basin Power Project, formerly known as the Joint System Power Project. In order to meet the 1979-1984 load growth of our consumers, a complex of 500 megawatt net coal-fired generating units is to be built in stages, with the first unit scheduled to be online in late 1979. With announcement of the project in early 1972, we communicated with other utilities, with government agencies and environmental groups, beginning an open planning process. A comprehensive plant siting study was undertaken, in which we examined more than 70 sites in 5 states to determine what would be the most economically attractive and environmentally sound location for a generating plant in the Missouri Basin. These studies led the MVPP sponsors to southeast Wyoming, where land has been acquired in the Wheatland-Torrington area for location of the generating complex. Water supplies and land for a reservoir have also been obtained. Preliminary environmental studies of the area have been completed, and an intensive environmental impact study is now underway. Final decision on location of the MVPP generating complex will be made prior to certificate approval by the Wyoming Public Service Commission, and when long-term arrangements for fuel supply are completed. Basin Electric Power Cooperative has been designated as MVPP project manager. Because the time schedule for the project is extremely tight, Basin Electric's excellent experience in building and operating power plants will be invaluable in making critical deadlines. In addition to Basin Electric, other participants are Tri-State GNC Association, which will participate to serve the needs of its members in Wyoming and Colorado, the Missouri Basin Municipal Power Agency, a regional municipal GNT, Heartland Consumers Power District in South Dakota, and the Lincoln Electric System, a sizable municipal utility in Nebraska. MVPP sponsors have selected the firm of Burns & McDonnell as architect engineers for the project. The participants in MVPP have from the very beginning been sensitive to the need for sound environmental planning. Since the participants represent and are controlled by people who live on farms and in the towns of the Plains area, we are dedicated to doing the best environmental planning possible. We have been working with an environmental advisory committee composed of citizen representatives of Plains area environmental organizations. Planning has and continues to be coordinated with the Environmental Advisory Committee. The building of the Missouri Basin Power Project should be a tremendous source of pride for all of us. It brings together for the first time the rural electrics and public power systems of the region as joint planners and owners in a project which maintains the integrity of our individual systems in a consumer-owned, consumer-controlled power supply program. In the Missouri Basin Power Project, we are not only witnessing the emergence of a strong regional organization providing an essential public service, but of a people-oriented organization which will strengthen the voice and identity Plains people have sought historically to bring stability, self-sufficiency, and orderly direction to the development of their region.
From the Rocky Mountains of the West, across the great open prairie to the eastern woodlands, there is at work in this vast and beautiful region a continuing heritage and tradition of people coming together to meet mutual human needs. Born out of a refusal to be subdued by adversity and nurtured by common experience, this continuing heritage is exemplified by the intensive regional cooperative effort that is now being undertaken to provide low-cost electric power, owned by the people themselves, for continued Missouri Basin development. Missouri Basin people, knowing that this low-cost power is essential to meet the mounting demands for food and fiber for the nation and the world, are embarking upon another challenging regional venture to meet the demands of an ever-growing agricultural economy. It is at these times that Great Plains people are at their best, for at their very heart and nature is the insistent urging to plan, to build, and to provide, to work together to make their region stronger and more viable for the future generations. To plan, to build, and to provide power for the plains.